Hello, my name is Rebecca Richardson, but most people call me Becky, and today I'm going to go through the 8 books I have read so far this year. If you watch my other videos, you'll know I did the mid-year book freakout tag last week, I think, and I wanted a chance to go into the books more in detail, as I mentioned in that video, so this will actually be more of a review style, I guess, of the books I've read. Like I just said, I've only read 8 books this year, and I know there'll be somebody watching who's like, only 8 books? Yeah, only 8 books. I don't read that much. I've talked about this time and time again. I'm using this channel as a way to increase what I read. So for me, 8 books, I am massively proud of that. At some point I'm going to do a video of the books I read like over the whole of 2018, and there are less books on that than there are on this video, which is just the first half of 2019. So I'm like hugely proud of the amount of books I've read this year, even if it seems like nothing to some other people. But because it's such a short amount, it means that I can actually film a video like this and go into detail about what I liked and didn't like about all 8 books. Again, as I've mentioned before, I am kind of behind on my books at the moment. I'm sort of reading series that came out a few years ago that everybody's over now, that I just haven't had a chance to read yet. So you probably have either heard of or read most of the books on this list, because very few of them are actually new releases for this year. So I'm going to go through them in the order that I actually read them this year. So we're starting off at the very beginning of the year with The Wicked King by Holly Black. This I read right at the beginning of the year because I was at a signing for Holly and Cassandra Clare in like beginning of February, I think. So I wanted to get this read like quickly so I could take it. I read The Cruel Prince at the end of like December, I think, and I'm not gonna lie, I was a bit disappointed just because these books have been hyped so much, and it was the first Holly Black book I've read, and I was expecting something else, I think, not from the story but from the writing. If I'm quite honest, I didn't like the way it was written. I thought parts of it seemed very robotic. I found I couldn't actually connect to Jude as a character at all because it felt like it was written quite robotic and I couldn't really see into her. There was whole bits where it felt like it was just like, I was sad, I was angry, and it just like really got on my nerves really quick, and I actually didn't think I was going to finish The Cruel Prince because it was annoying me so much. I still haven't really connected to Jude as a character in The Wicked King for kind of the same reason, but also because I don't really understand her motives at all. I kind of like, I get the side of things where like she's a human living in the Fae world and they don't like that and she wants to be a knight, but like the way it escalated so quickly and now she's like in control of like everybody, I didn't really understand what her motivation was, and I did find that it hasn't been explained very well, which is the other thing I'd say. However, I did enjoy The Wicked King more than The Cruel Prince. I liked the characters. I thought Carden was a lot nicer in this. I didn't like Carden in the first book. He got on my nerves because he was just like mean to people. He was just straight up rude. But he got better towards the end, and then I found myself actually really liking him in this when we found out more about him. The plot in this I also preferred. I liked the faster pace of it, and one thing I do like about this series is the theme of betrayal and like how dark things get so quickly and sort of like the messed up things some characters do. Like, Jude really needs to go to therapy. That girl is so messed in the head, and I'm always just like, oh my god, please, please somebody get her a counsellor. Like, all of them need a counsellor. So yes, I did like the kind of dark themes in this, and I always love a good fairy book. I'm like a massive fantasy person, and I am also really excited to see how Queen of Nothing goes based on how this ended, because it ended very well. But yeah, I don't usually rate books, but if I was going to, then this would definitely be a lower rating, just because it wasn't what I was hoping it would be, and the writing, although it didn't really bother me as much in this one, I kind of, like, either I zoned it out or it changed, I don't know, but it didn't bother me the same way it did, but it still wasn't as good as I would have liked it to be, and as good as I was expecting from what other people had said. So the next book I read in the first half of 2019 is Empire of Storms by Sarah J Maas. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I've had like a difficult relationship with Throne of Glass. I started the series like the beginning of last year when I decided that I was just going to start reading more and I was going to, you know, kick it and get it all done, and I chose Throne of Glass as that first series, and the first 3 books was so slow. I found them really difficult to read. I didn't really relate to any of the characters. I found some of the characters really annoying. It was just difficult. Even the 3rd book, when it suddenly became more high fantasy, I know the 3rd book is when a lot of people gave up and a lot of people said it changes so much, like it does a full 180, like you can't predict what's going to happen. And I was reading the first book thinking I knew exactly what was going to happen, and I was like, I know what's going on here, and then it just changed so suddenly. But that wasn't even the reason why I didn't like it, because I do enjoy fantasy. It was just, I just found them a bit slow until like the last like 30 pages of Air of Fire. I was like ready to give up. I was like, need to stop. I think what got me through it is that some of the characters I did really like. I'm a massive fan of Aelin Galathynius, even though she kind of got my nerves a bit in like the first like 2 books maybe. And I also love Dorian, but the first 3 books were difficult. Honestly, I don't remember much of book 4. I know I read it in like a week because I was on holiday and that's like quick for me. But I don't really remember much of the plot line other than it was a bit more fast paced. There wasn't much action, but there was a lot happening and it was tense the entire way through because everything that was going on with Dorian in that book. And the kind of faster pace and the way that things moved did help me get through it quicker, but I did still find myself dragging with it. And I kind of just wanted to get it over, which I think is why I was reading it so quick, because I just wanted to like finish the series and move on to something new. Then, however, this came along. Empire of Storms was so much better than the first 4, in my opinion. I love this book so much. Like I said, I love a lot of action and fast pace, and this entire book was exactly that. So much happened in such little time, and it felt like a bit like Game of Thrones, where the first like 3 seasons are really slow and then like season 4 onwards everything happened. That is kind of how it felt when I went into this book. Everything was suddenly happening, but I enjoyed it. I especially liked the sort of dynamic between different characters and the characters we saw interacting more, because a lot of this book was spent like on a boat with all the characters just having to get on with each other. We did see a lot of dynamics change and sort of new relationships form. I really liked seeing Manon and Dorian actually become like a kind of couple in this book. I thought that was really good. I wasn't expecting them at all. In Air of Fire, I was like, who is this Manon Blackbeard? Why is she there? Like, why is she here? But she's quickly become one of my favourites, and as soon as someone was like, oh yeah, she ends up with Dorian, I was like, what? Like, I didn't expect that at all. I will say, however, that the thing on the back of this book that says contains mature content is definitely needs to be there. At first I was like, why does it say that? Because I've never noticed that on the back of the other books, and I don't actually think it says that on a lot of the back of the books. And then I just noticed it on the back of this, and my friend who's read them was like, oh yeah, Empire of Storms, and I was like, yeah, definitely need that. But I definitely enjoyed this book so much. Like I said, the fast pace, all of the fight scenes, it was just done so well. I also like the emotions this book made me feel. Like, I was so frustrated with certain parts of it because of specific characters just being horrible, but I was supposed to be frustrated with them, and I was glad that that actually came across to me as a reader, because quite often I'm supposed to feel things in a book that I just don't care. There's quite often in books something happens and it's supposed to be big and dramatic and sad, and I just could not care less, but it wasn't with this book. Everything that I was supposed to feel, I actually felt, and I was very happy about that. That does lead me on to talk about the end. I'm not going to actually say anything about the end other than the fact it was absolutely brutal. I had several friends say to me, the end of Empire of Storms is so sad, and I was like, why? What happens? But yeah, it was really sad. I almost skipped Tower of Dawn because the end of this book was just so unexpected that I just wanted to get on with Kingdom of Ash, and I very nearly skipped Tower of Dawn to get on with it. But yeah, very glad that I actually got around to reading this, because for a while I didn't think I was going to make it this far into the series, and I know so many people who stopped reading after book 3, and I'm like, please just keep giving it a chance, because for me it got so much better with Empire of Storms, which is like the 5th book in the series, which isn't great. Like, I should have been into it earlier than that, admittedly, but this really like kicked things off and bumped Throne of Glass up my rating as far as books that I actually enjoy go. The next book I read in the first half of 2019 is The Red Scrolls of Magic by Cassandra Clare. In this book we follow Magnus and Alec, who are from the Mortal Instruments, as they go on holiday around Europe, basically. I believe it takes place between City of Glass and City of Fallen Angels, which are the 3rd and 4th book in the Mortal Instruments series. There's a whole section in, I think it's Fallen Angels, where Magnus and Alec are just on holiday. Like, we don't really hear from them. It's just, oh, they're in Europe, they're on holiday, and every now and then a character will like get a text of them like posing in some other country. And this is the book basically of what they were doing during that time. I was a little bit disappointed with this, I'm not gonna lie. I did fully enjoy it and I loved it because I love Magnus and Alec so much, but I felt the writing wasn't as good as it could have been. I thought it was a bit simplistic and that it felt a little bit rushed at times. This is a problem I've had with other Cassandra Clare books, especially like her newer ones. I said the same thing about Ghost of the Shadow Market in my review of that, and even Queen of Air and Darkness I thought felt kind of similar, and I don't know if it's because she's bringing out more books at the moment and we've kind of gone into quantity over quality, which I'd like to think isn't the case, but there's just been something about the more recent books that I've found have been a bit of a like decline in the writing and how much I've actually enjoyed it as a book because of the writing. That being said, however, this is a really fun book. It's definitely not supposed to be like a main series like big dramatic book. It's just like a bit of fun. I love Magnus and Alec as characters, and they were exactly the same in this, and it was really fun to see the early stages of their relationship. Alec Lightwood is possibly my all-time favourite character because I found him so relatable in the first few Mortal Instruments books. I was going through quite a hard time when I first read them, and I thought he was like super easy to relate to, and so it was really nice to go back to that and to see him as that young boy again compared to where he is now, where he's just progressed so much. And just going back to that, it was almost nostalgic in a way, but it was also nice to see, and to see just the beginnings of their relationship. One good point to this though definitely is that I couldn't actually tell when the author changed. So this book is Cassandra Clare and also Wesley Chu, and usually when a Cassandra Clare book is co-written I can tell when it's her and when it's not. And as much as it doesn't take too much away from the experience of reading the book, it does sometimes affect it because it kind of pulls me out of it a little bit when I'm suddenly aware of like, oh, this is somebody else reading it, I forgot this isn't real kind of thing. But with this, I could not tell you when it was Cassandra Clare and when it was Wesley Chu. Like, I didn't know. Whether that's down to the editing or whether that's down to them as writers, I don't know. But that was something that I was very happy about. Like I mentioned, the plot in this was just a bit of fun, which I thought was great. I loved seeing the European aesthetic. I thought all of the different cities they visited were just shown to be so pretty and so cute. I also loved all the cameos from other characters, especially Rafael Santiago and also Johnny Rook, who I wasn't expecting to see in it. I thought they were all done in a really funny way, and they were made to seem like just very humorous, which is always Cassandra Clare's style. And the whole book was just so light-hearted, even towards the end when Magnus was about to be sacrificed to his father, and he makes some horrible quip about how they're making him wear a white suit to an evening event, and I was just like, it's now the time. But just that humour that it constantly follows them, especially Magnus, because Magnus is just like that as a character. I was so glad that that translated into this book and we saw that throughout. I also like the new characters in this. I wasn't expecting the plot twist that much. Like, I kind of like had an inkling of what was to come, and I was like kind of expecting something, but it was still a bit of a surprise when everything like kind of hit the fan. And also the plotline with Ragnar. Obviously from reading Queen of Air and Darkness I knew what had become of Ragnar, but nobody really knew how it got there, and so actually kind of finding out the first bit of what actually happened to Ragnar was really great, and I'm really excited for the Lost Book of the White to find out more about that, and also just to see more of Alec and Magnus's adventures. The next book I read in the first half of 2019 was Tower of Dawn by Sarah J Maas. Like I mentioned, I very nearly skipped this book, and it definitely wasn't my favourite, but I didn't not enjoy it. Basically, long story short, I'm not a fan of K.L. Westfall. I don't like him. And I knew that this entire book was about him. When I found out, I was so annoyed. I was like, oh, I know Tower of Dawn's a bit different because the cover's totally different, and I could rant about that for so long, but I didn't really know why it was different. And then my friend was like, oh yeah, none of the main characters are in it other than K.L. And I just sat for a strong moment like, oh. I just don't like him, and I was really sad because the one thing at that point that was getting me through them, because this was before I read Empire of Storms, was literally just some of the characters. I was like, I'm reading this for you, and for then to find out that none of those characters were actually in this book, I was like, how on earth am I going to get through this? Like, I just don't care about K.L. So a massive struggle I had with this book was that a lot of it was subplot, which made it difficult because, of course, all the subplot revolved around K.L. and his love life and what he was doing and his struggles, and I just could not have cared less. The only thing that really got me through it was Irene. I really like Irene as a character. I loved what she became as the series continued, even if she was only in like this and one more book, unfortunately. But she was kind of what got me through it. All of the bits where it was like K.L.'s love life, like Irene was the only thing that got me through that. I did enjoy Nesrin's plotline in this. Again, Nesrin's not one of my favourites, so there was a few bits still I was like a bit bored of. Irene's perspective was like the one perspective I enjoyed, but I did like the plot with Nesrin and the spiders when they ended up like in the cave and there was like spiders trying to eat them and stuff, and the stuff that they found out about Maeve. I thought that was all very interesting. And I would definitely say, if you're in the situation I was in where you've read Empire of Storms and just want to skip this, because I know a lot of people who are in that situation, I would definitely recommend reading this, just because there was definitely plot points in this that were necessary to know for Kingdom of Ash. Like, you could probably read Kingdom of Ash without having read this, but a lot of it, like, wouldn't make as much sense as it would. A lot of the characters from this book do show up in Kingdom of Ash. They have important roles, especially Irene, and having read this definitely gives you the knowledge. I think I would have felt a bit out of depth reading Kingdom of Ash without reading this first, just because you do need information from this for Kingdom of Ash. One thing I did really like about this book is the setting. If you haven't read this book, it is set in the southern continent of the Throne of Glass universe. It's a continent we don't see in any of the other books, and I did really like the setting. I love the way it was described. I could almost smell the spices they were talking about and feel the heat, and it was just a very cosy and very nice setting. And at the beginning, the setting was what kept me reading until we kind of got to know more about Irene. That was definitely the strongest point to it, I'd say, outside of like Irene as a character who I just love so much. So yeah, definitely not my favourite book of the year, definitely something that took me a long time to read because I had to drag myself through it, but when I read Kingdom of Ash, I was glad that I'd read this. And speaking of, the next book that I read in the first half of 2019 was Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J Maas. I love this. I read this book in a week, which for me, bearing in mind that this is one thick book, was like super quick. And again, it comes down to the whole fast-paced issue. If you haven't read this book, it is the last in the Throne of Glass series, and it follows Aelin finally becoming queen throughout her like massive struggle and fight to get there. The entire book is war, basically. Like, I don't think there's one point in this book where one of the perspectives isn't a war. Like, from the beginning, it's like at least Aedion, I think, is in battles. Like, it just continues throughout the entire book, and I loved that because I love battles in books. I will say that the first like 200 pages were really difficult for me because I hated Aelin's perspective so much. If you've read the book, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I am so squeamish, I feel far too empathetic for fictional characters, and it just like, it was so difficult to read. I hated it so much. I was just reading it thinking, stop, please, I can't take this. It was horrible, but horrible in a good way, not horrible as in like I didn't enjoy it. Like, I didn't enjoy it, but it's good that I didn't enjoy it because that's how it was supposed to come across. But yeah, I still lay awake at night thinking about the first 200 pages of this goddamn book. And I suppose in a way that's a good thing because it meant that it had an effect on me and that I will remember this. But yes, the battles in this were definitely amazing. I just loved all of them, and I love the fact that it wasn't a case of a winning game straight away. A lot of it was losing battles. Poor Aedion went through so much, he just kept losing, and the fact that you saw all the characters kind of break down and kind of reach a very low point where they thought that nothing was ever going to be good, especially Aelin, then for everything to become what it did and to sort of switch on its head, I thought was really good because it was just such an emotional roller coaster. I just couldn't put this book down, and it's not very often that I find myself in a position where I can't put a book down. A lot of the time I tell myself to read 50 pages, and then once I read those 50 pages we can put it down. But with this, I was reading 50 pages and then being like, we can read another 50, we can read another 50 after that. Like, I just thoroughly enjoyed this book. I just could not actually drag my eyes away from it because there was always something happening. There was always like another cliffhanger or another action scene, and it just made me want to keep reading. It was also super sad. It's not very often that books make me cry. There's few books that have made me cry, but this one did. I bawled like a baby, and I never cry like proper tears at books, but this one I did. Again though, I suppose that's a good thing because it shows that the book did actually have an effect on me, and the characters didn't just die for no reason. I just thought this was a really good way to end the entire series. I loved it so much, and then I finished and I saw people like, oh, there's so much negativity in the fandom surrounding Kingdom of Ash, and I honestly don't understand why because I really, really enjoyed this book. It was my favourite out of the series. I just loved everything about it. I love the different plot lines for the characters. I also loved the way that we focused on other characters as well as Aelin. I think that was one problem a lot of people had, was that Aelin is the main character, but we also saw more of the likes of like Dorian and Manon and that, which I don't particularly understand people's problem with that because she's the main character, but there's also other characters and she definitely had the most page time. But I also really enjoyed seeing Dorian grow as a person, especially as he learned to shapeshift, and that whole funny bit where he just shapeshifted into a woman and everything that came with that, and the bit where he was a mouse and then he was like a bird. And I thought seeing him go through all of that, and also all of the other stuff he did when he was like, spent half of the book going on about how he was going to be like the martyr and he was going to like die for the cause, and I was just like, please just shut up and go to bed, Dorian. But like, seeing the other characters was also very nice, and also seeing how the storylines eventually intertwined because they all started off so separate at the beginning of this book, and then watching everybody come together for the big battle at the end was just really amazing. I also loved the way Aelin was represented in this book. Throughout the series, she's been this like big, powerful woman, and it's all kind of relied on her powers. I found there's always been a big emphasis on her powers and how like, oh, she's the big queen because she has these fire powers. You know, everybody's like, oh, fire breathing bitch queen. Like, that's kind of her thing, is that she has these amazing powers. And I really liked the bit where she lost those. I know that was another point that people weren't too happy about. People were like, oh, you know, like, she should have kept her powers, it was stupid that they got rid of them, and that it, like, erased her character development or something, and I could come into how that's, like, incorrect for quite a long time. But I really enjoyed that move because it did definitely show that whereas throughout the entire series it's been like, yeah, Aelin, she's so great, she has these fire powers, it was definitely done to show that actually it's not her powers that make her strong, it's her that makes her strong. And I thought that was a great move on Sarah J Maas's part to take those powers away from her and show that she is more than just that fire, she is her own person, and she can win a war whether she has these amazing powers or not. It definitely felt like something that had to happen in the book and had to sort of show another side of her, and so I was really glad that it happened like that, and I think it was dealt with really well. And instead of everybody just being like, oh, Aelin's like not Aelin anymore, boo-hoo, we very much saw her become her own person, and it just proved that she is strong because of who she is as a person. Other writing things that I absolutely adored in this, and I'm like so glad they were put in there, was definitely the king's name. Again, obviously, this entire thing is spoilery, but the fact that the king purposefully didn't get named throughout the entire series was like proper like mind-boggling for me. Literally probably about 50 pages before the scene where the king's name is revealed, I was thinking, the king's name's never mentioned. Like, have I just like forgot it? Like, I fully thought that it must have just been mentioned once in like book one and then just thrown aside, and I was supposed to just remember it, and I just hadn't, because I just couldn't remember him ever having a name. But I just assumed, I was like, oh, it must have been in there at some point, but it wasn't, and it purposefully wasn't. And when that was revealed, I was like, what? Excuse me. It was just such a good little plot twist. I thought it was amazing, the fact that that was just shoved in there, and it wasn't even as if it was something you remembered. You didn't spend the entire series thinking, what's the king's name? Like, it was done so subtly that you didn't even really mention it. It wasn't even till like 50 pages, like I said beforehand, that I actually thought, what is the king's name? When was the king ever named? You know, it was not something that you considered. It was something that entirely goes over the reader's head. And then for it to suddenly be something so important was like ridiculous. I was like, it proper like blew my mind, and I think that is really good writing, being able to weave that throughout the entire series in a way that nobody even noticed, and then to bring it out as such a big thing. I thought it was just done really well. I could talk about this book forever because I did hugely enjoy it, and it was definitely my favourite in the series, but I won't keep going on about it forever. I would definitely recommend finishing the series just for this book. Like I said, there's so many people who give up on this series, but book 5 and book 7 was so good, and I massively enjoyed them. The next book I read in the first half of 2019 is Ghosts of the Shuttle Market by Cassandra Clare. I have done a whole review of this, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about it because that video was like 40 minutes long and it went on forever, but I did hugely enjoy this. Again, whether that's because I'm a little bit biased and I'm like kind of obsessed with Gemcasters, but like, you know, that doesn't matter. It's a good book anyway. I really enjoyed seeing him with his family in this, and as I mentioned in my review, I loved seeing his journey from like the Infernal Devices era through to like Queen of Air and Darkness and past that. I thought that was just really exciting, especially seeing how he changes a person from the points of his silent brother existence where he couldn't even remember his own name to like the later ones where he's got a family and he's Gem again and everything's just happy, and seeing him go through that journey and the people he met along the way and the stories that took place along the way was just really nice and really cute. Some of them, I would say, out of all the short stories I've read from Cassandra Clare, some of my least favourites were in this book. I wasn't a big fan of The Lost World, mainly because, like, Gem wasn't in it. Like, he was in it, like, once. He cameoed in his own book, which I think is the most Gemcasters thing to do, as one of my favourite underdogs ever. Just, you know, cameo in your own book, why don't you? Also, Learn About Loss, I think, was one of my least favourites, just because it wasn't what I was expecting it to be, and I thought it ended quite abruptly, and it was a bit confusing. But there was also some brilliant stories in this with some of my favourite characters, and also some of the new characters in the last hours who I'm so excited to learn more about next year. Yeah, I just really enjoyed this. Like I said, could be a bit biased, but that doesn't matter, it's fine, because this was a really good book. So the second to last book that I read in the first half of 2019 is, of course, Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. Again, I'm not going to talk about this much because I just did a review on it and I talked about it in my last video, but I love this book so much. It was so good. I loved it. I'm obsessed with all of the characters, I'm obsessed with the storyline. I've talked about this so much today and for the last like 3 days and for the weeks that I was reading it. If you're looking for something that isn't the usual YA and isn't like great or good romance, then definitely pick up this book. That's like really all I'm going to say about this, because I feel like people are sick of me ranting in the last like 3 videos about how much I love this book. So I'm just not even going to say anything else. I'm just going to stop there, but so good. I loved all of the characters. I've talked about it a million times, but I have a very special place in my heart for Kaz Brekker, and I just love all of them and their motives and the writing and just the plotline in general. It's also brilliant and so funny whilst also being dark. So yeah, read that. And last but certainly not least, the last book I read in the first half of 2019 is of course Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. Again, I'm not going to talk about it too much because I've done a whole thing on this and I just talked about Six of Crows and my feelings on that, the same as this. I will say this confused me a little bit. The plot was a lot more intricate and a lot more complex than the first book, and as someone who doesn't follow like complex storylines very well, I did struggle. There was a lot of like business going on and a lot of like investing in this and sabotaging this and like fueling money from there. I just didn't really get a lot of it, but I enjoyed it anyway because I was so obsessed with the characters and also how it kept you on your toes. Like, you weren't supposed to know everything. You were supposed to be shocked when things happened, and I thought that played out really well. I also loved how it ended. Everything was so happy and so nice. I did mention this before, I wish we hadn't had that Pekka Rollins bit at the end. I liked it, but I didn't think it needed to be right at the end. I did feel like we were kind of robbed of a really happy ending, but I did thoroughly enjoy this series, and like I just said, I would recommend them. However, I was told that there's no spoilers in this duology. Crooked Kingdom is filled with Grisha Trilogy spoilers, so if you haven't read the Grisha Trilogy, I'd like maybe read them before you read Crooked Kingdom. Six of Crows was fine, there was nothing in it, but like there was quite a bit. I know the fate of like every character in the Grisha Trilogy now because of this. But that aside, I did massively enjoy it, just like I did book one, and I'm like really excited to actually go back and read the Grisha Trilogy. But yeah, like I mentioned, I'm not going to say anything else about these books because I've talked about them forever. So that is it. That is the books I have read in the first half of 2019. I hope that this has inspired you to maybe still look into some of them yourself if you haven't already read them, and if you have read them, please feel free to leave a comment telling me which was your favourite and which you enjoyed and which you didn't enjoy, because I'm always up for talking about that, especially if it's Six of Crows. Thank you so much for watching this. I will see you in the next video. Bye!